All right, listeners, I think you know that we are part of the Radiotopia network, which is basically a network built on the idea that you should support the most creative, independent audio makers around. No one, and I mean no one, embodies the Radiotopia ethos more than Benjamin Walker and his show Theory of Everything. Benjamin, who I've known for a long time, has been making beautiful, personal, sprawling audio documentaries for decades that help us understand the very strange world we live in. And now he has a new series called Not All Propaganda is Art. The new series goes back to the 1950s when Western security agencies like the CIA paid artists, writers, and intellectuals to fight the cultural Cold War.
The CIA funds were free. I mean, no one was told what to say.
Gloria Steinem, activist who sees the CIA as a sort of enlightened pal or rich uncle, there is another viewpoint.
Look, if you're listening to this show, I know you like secret histories. I know you like a mix of culture and politics and shadowy figures. So what are you waiting for? Not All Propaganda is Art from Benjamin Walker. You can find it now wherever you listen or at theoryofeverythingpodcast.com. This episode is brought to you by Progressive, where drivers who save by switching save nearly $750 on average. Quote now at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates, national average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, September 26, 1977, Chicago Alderman Frank D. Stemberg offers a serious escalation in the war on rats. Look, any city has to face its rodent problem, and any good local politician will at some point have to deal with these kinds of quality of life issues. But what did Frank Stemberg do? He took it to another level. He offered a $1 bounty for each rat tail delivered to him, each rat killed in the city of Chicago. Basically, vigilante justice, man versus rat. May the odds be ever in your favor. So here to discuss the war on rats this moment, as always, are Nicole Hemmer of Columbia and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody. Were you hoping that the odds were in the favor of the humans? Or the
well, I will disclose where I stand over the course of this episode.
Oh, gosh. Can I just say, this is my least favorite episode.
Great.
Just from the start.
We're going to really indulge it here. So, Kellie, let me ask you the first question.
Oh,
all right. No, but seriously, I mean, obviously, rodent control, a big issue for any city.
Oh, yeah.
In this moment, 1977, in Chicago, it does feel like in the forever war on rats, the rats might be winning at this moment.
Yes. I mean, if you think about the 1970s and just cities all across the country, New York in particular, I say this because, there was like a sanitation worker strike, and when you took out your trash, you basically had to kick the can to let the rats scurry out before you could, put your trash in. I mean, this is a plague that is happening all across the country, how to get rid of rats. And also the poison that they had available at the time was not that effective. So it took several doses to kill some of these suckers. And slowly but surely they start to take over. And you can imagine if you live near, a subway, tunnels, train stations, things like that, these become, breeding grounds for rodent infestations.
Yeah.
And even people's houses. That's the thing that, even in New York today, obviously, rats are still pretty popular, pretty frequent. I see them quite a lot in my own neighborhood, but I see them on the sidewalk. I see them in trash piles. I don't see them in a garage or my house itself. And it seems like, especially in Chicago in the 1970s, these rats were infesting people's houses. It was a real problem.
So to give you just an idea of how bad this problem was, in 1974, there's a major blizzard, and a West Side man who was outside trying to get inside to seek shelter and he is extremely tired. He crawls inside of a boiler room and pretty much collapses and falls asleep on this pile of trash. When they find his body 3 days later, the rats inside that boiler room have gnawed at his legs pretty much completely to the bone, and his legs have to be amputated as a result of falling asleep on that pile of trash. And that to me was one of the most egregious stories, because it just showed that not only can you not seek shelter during a blizzard, but that these rats are lethal, or had the potential to be lethal for people who are not equipped to fight them off.
Yeah, the so-called super rats of the mid-'70s in Chicago bit about 100 people a year and would often do that indoors and crawl in. There's also just this interesting thing. I mean, I suppose it's not a surprise, but, rodents are like a reflection of the state of cities, as we've been discussing. And so one interesting sort of deeper trend here is obviously a lot of this has to do with trash disposal. And, in the 20s, 30s, 40s, people burned their trash. They didn't really think about it, so they just burned their trash and it went away. And then in the 50s, people started to be concerned a little bit more about air pollution, and so they started to store their trash in huge trash cans. Rats loved that, right? So it tracks this other sort of... And then, as we were saying, in the 70s, as cities are really facing a lot of fiscal problems, and trash cleanup is not as effective, and building codes are sort of falling by the wayside and so forth. All of these things start to then manifest themselves in rats going nuts. And I will say, I think I have New York elitism about everything, right? And I think New York's the best city in the world for everything. I will say that over the course of this, there is part of me that also wants to say New York rats are the most aggressive. New York has the worst rats. And even this weird twisted pride, right? I have to say over the course of reading this, it does seem like Chicago's ongoing, ever-present rat problem may top... I don't know if top's the right word. Maybe worse than New York's. They may beat us on that one.
Oh man, I mean, it was bad when you realize that, sort of brutally killing these rats. There's not a whole lot of humane things that you can do. You can try to bring in cats, which they did, and owls. But again, when you have millions of rats, and Chicago was reporting 6 million rats at the time, that's just that's I can't get over that. That's like the population of New York City probably at the time. It's a rat per person. That is an enormous amount of effort is going to be required in order to eradicate those large numbers of rodents. And you can't just do it. Even chopping off the tail, I was kind of like, I don't want the tail. Show me the head. Show me it's dead.
You're afraid that people are just going to be collecting tails and letting the rats run free. Those tails just grow back like lizards, so you can make a lot of money with one rat. But this is also the brutality of it is also an important part of the story, because there weren't necessarily on hand the kinds of rat poisons and other control mechanisms that they have today. A lot of these rat control groups, especially in the early days of this, they were using clubs. They would smoke them out, and then they would beat them to death, which feels like, I mean, if you hate rats, probably feels like justice, but it's an extremely visceral way of controlling rats.
And we'll talk a little bit about some of the ways in which the tide begins to turn a little bit, maybe towards the late 70s or so forth, which has a lot to do with improved poison, basically. But in this moment, yes, this sort of vigilante, brutal war on rats. One particular element of that just really catches my eye is a man by the name of Terry Howard gets drafted by Richard Daley, the legendary mayor of Chicago in the early 70s. Terry Howard is the president of rodent control. And this guy he's got a real rat thing going on, because when he was head of the bureau, he reportedly had a photo of a 2-pound rat on his wall, which is the biggest rat ever caught in the city of Chicago. And he once was quoted as saying, "I still get a kick out of killing rats. I've seen too much damage done. This is my ball game. My Cubs, my Bears, my Sox. Killing rats is my ball game. They're just another dumb animal." So, I suppose the right person for the job, but... between him and the person who we're talking about here today, Alderman Frank Stemberg, who put this bounty on the rats, you can sort of see this real Wild West justice at play.
I mean, these rats, though, they do incredible amounts of harm too, though. Like when people are getting bit, little kids can wake up to like rats biting their toes or biting their fingers off. I mean, like that to me is just a whole nother level. It reminded me of the song Why You Put a Man on the Moon, where he says, a rat done bit my sister Nell while Whitey's on the moon. And I was like, yes, like there's also this duality if you pull out from the scene about like the incredible things that the federal government is doing in terms of like space exploration, and yet we can't seem to solve rats in U.S. cities.
Right, the quality of life thing, it always comes down to that. And I think that's a good place to talk about Frank Stenberg, right, Niki, because he really did represent, we haven't mentioned sort of class issues, poverty. Obviously, that scans across all of this story as well. And Frank Stenberg represented a relatively poor district in Chicago that was really facing a real problem here.
Yeah, I mean, there is a real correlation between poverty, in part because, that it's harder to do upkeep. The city services in poorer areas aren't as good. You get less trash pickup. You get less responsiveness from the city. And in this case, Stenberg, who represented the 22nd Ward, for those of you who know the Chicago area, he, like you said, he's offering $1 per tail, which could have really blown up in his face. My dad once paid us, I think, like $0.25 for each gumball we picked up in the yard. Those are those little prickly burrs that fall off of gum trees. And he ended up owing us a ton of money because it's really motivating to be able to get out there and collect and cash in. Now, in this case, in about 2 weeks, he had to pay for about 550 rats. But given how quickly rats reproduce, somebody could have made quite a lot of money and put the 22nd Ward in some fiscal crisis itself.
I cannot tell you how opposite my reaction to that was. I was like, $1 is not even close to enough to kill a rat. Not just kill the rat with your bare hands. Oh, man. You have to present evidence of the tail. What do you carry the tail? And you got to put it in a Ziploc. You got to pick it up with tweezers and put it in a Ziploc, and then you got to get on the train. And you got to go to Frank's office. $1 is so not enough money.
No, miss
to
me
do
with that. I'm out.
Even in 1970s dollars. I mean, there was inflation, so maybe that made it less worth your time.
I just can't. I mean, I was talking with a friend earlier in South Africa. They had done something similar where there was a town that had a rat infestation, and the prize was whoever caught the most rats or killed the most rats won a cell phone. So, I was like, cell phone, okay, that's more than $1, But I mean, but if you also think about the fact that, the 70s people are really hard hit, and I hate to say every dollar counts, but it's true. So that, if you could kill $20 could do some things even in the 1970s that might be useful. So it depends on your perspective.
Yeah. So look, this is obviously an effort, trying everything they possibly can to stem the tide. It really does, at the end of the day, I think, come down to a couple things that from the peak of how bad it was in the sort of mid-late 70s, it starts to really change things. So one is, yes, poisons become more effective. I mean, but in the mid-70s, they're using poisons that maybe take 2 or 3 doses in order to kill a rat. Stuff called warfarin and red squill are 2 of the poisons that were being used by city crews. Eventually, they start using an anticoagulant called Talon, which killed rats with a single feeding. Not in a pleasant way. Rats would they'd get poisoned and they would stumble around and start bleeding and just then keel over dead, but nevertheless, some people have described it as a kind of atom bomb going off in Chicago, and really all of a sudden in the late 70s, 1979, the rats start to go away. That said, it is still an ongoing problem. In 2020, Chicago was still called the rattiest city in America. 6 years in a row it had won that.
Rude.
And yes, hey, they're not the second city.
We're number one.
You can go ahead and keep that prize.
Yeah, exactly. And New York has had it too. Bill de Blasio here in New York City made, killing rats a big part of his problem, especially in certain neighborhoods in the city. Like I know Lower Manhattan and Bed-Stuy are really bad on those fronts. And a lot of it does, again, tie to city services. When trash collection is better, the rat problem starts to go away a little bit. When there's better building inspections, rat problem starts to go away. When, city services are more responsive to people who are calling 311 or 911 or whatever and saying, look, we have this problem, and they send out a crew to try and deal with it. So it's a reflection of kind of the state of city services. There's also little things like in Chicago, they started to make pest control and garbage control part of the same department, whereas in other cities, they're separate. Like all these things, it's a reflection. Yeah, it's a reflection how you run your city. And so all these things really, really matter. Okay, so as we start to wrap up, look, anytime you start talking about these things, especially to someone who lives in a city like New York or Chicago, they have a story. I want to give space if anyone wants to share a traumatic rat story. I will also say our producer, Jacob Feldman, does these very thorough preps. They're often full of interesting links to other stuff related to the stories we're talking about. I did not click on a single link in this prep. I did not want to read extra stories, but I gather, Niki, you may have.
I did click on the link, and I will say that Jacob did put trigger warnings, I would say, on the various links to warn us what was coming. And one of the stories that he linked to was this story about more humane methods for killing rats, if killing can be made humane. First of all, I think we need to back up and just say, like, as you said in the intro, this is a forever war. We've always been at war with rats, and they really, look, the plague is on them, and that wiped out like a third of Europe. So we have a lot of ground to make up. But in recent years, there has been a lot of pro-rat propaganda, things like the movie Ratatouille, Pizza Rat, which became this big hero in New York City. Even if you've ever seen the cartoon Charlotte's Web, there's a rat in that who is a major player. Mm-hmm. And so people want these rats treated more humanely. And so now they're doing things instead of those anticoagulants that were so effective in gruesomely killing all of these rats, packing dry ice into rat burrows in order to smoke them out. But the thing that Jacob had linked to was something that was called rat soup, which is basically a bin next to the garbage that you put out on the streets, and the rats crawl in to get all that yummy, yummy garbage, and they fall into this liquid that kills them, and they just sort of like gather there for a month or so, and then they come along and they grab the rats and refill the liquid and continue to drown rats on your sidewalk.
But
God.
they just sort of
God.
are living in this container, stewing up together in the hot New York sun.
They said that it does not smell, although reporters on the scene suggested that that was not a promise they were keeping.
Oh, God. This is my least favorite episode. Least favorite episode. I'm all squirmish.
We're nearing the end of the episode. I will not force you to tell a rat story unless you want. Look, I have a story. Everyone in New York, I feel like, has a rat story.
Yes.
I, for one, once stepped directly on a rat when I was living in the East Village.
Alive or dead?
It was alive. It was scurrying, and our paces just perfectly aligned where I stepped down. And I will tell you, I will never forget the feeling of the rat like compressing underneath my sole, letting out a little squeak. Me lifting my foot and then it continuing to scurry on. But I will never, ever, ever forget that feeling of stepping down on that live rat.
Okay, I have a story, but it's not mine, thank God. But so I'm always traumatized by rodents, wholesale, like mice. I don't even really like squirrels, like all things rodent. So my friend was telling me that her uncle worked in the subway and, checking on the technology or the trains or whatever. And they had a therapy group for people that, had seen something trauma, like if someone jumped on the tracks or something like that. And he was in the trauma group and they asked him why. And he said, because he opened a utility closet and rats jumped out into his face. Gosh. And he has had major PTSD ever since. And I was like,
I don't like this story.
My gosh. I know this might get cut. It's a lot. And the horror of that, I can't even imagine.
Cut to someone in a therapy group 2 weeks from now being like, I was listening to this history podcast, and all of a sudden they started telling stories about rats, and I find it incredibly traumatizing.
I haven't slept since.
Really?
Send your therapy bills to Radiotopia.
I know.
Look, there were so many opportunities to end this episode over the last 10 minutes or so. But I think maybe this is the time to actually do so. Maybe we should have learned the lesson a little earlier. But unless, Niki, do you have a story?
Look, I feel like I contributed rat soup, and I'll leave it there. Let's finally chop the tail off of this one.
There you go. Okay, so that does bring us to the end of the episode. Thanks to you, Nicole Hemmer of Columbia.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley.
I can't say my pleasure, but thanks.
There it is. This Day in Esoteric Political History is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, listener-supported, artist-owned podcasts. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Our producer is Brittany Brown. Kala Nakua helps with transcripts. Julie Shapiro is executive producer for Radiotopia. Get in touch with us if you have any questions or comments or ideas for the show. You can email us thisdaypod@gmail.com, or you can find a form at thisdaypod.com, where you can also get our full archives, transcripts, and learn lots more about the show. Follow us on social at thisdaypod on Instagram and Twitter, where we are posting stuff each and every day. My name is Jody Avirgan. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon. Support for This Day in Esoteric Political History comes from Odoo. What is Odoo? Well, Odoo is the only software your business will ever need. Featuring a suite of integrated business applications, Odoo connects your business operations together so you can get more done in less time. Odoo has apps for everything: CRM, accounting, sales, HR, inventory, marketing, manufacturing, you name it, Odoo's got it. To learn more, visit odoo.com/thisday. That's odoo.com/thisday.
Radiotopia.